My wife, Jessica, and I had been together for almost 12 years, married for 8 of those. We had this life, you know. A steady routine. She worked as a project manager for some marketing firm, pulling in late nights more often than not. And me, well, I run a small chain of gyms in town, so my schedule's pretty flexible. I guess that's what made it so easy to overlook the little things. Last weekend, we planned this picnic. It was something we hadn't done in ages. We packed up a cooler full of sandwiches, chips, her favorite wine, and some lemonade for me. The whole thing was her idea. She'd been acting a bit distant for the past month or so, but I figured work was just stressing her out. She could be intense when it came to her job, never letting anyone tell her what to do, always in control. Hell, that's one of the reasons I fell for her. She didn't take crap from anyone. We set up at our favorite spot in the park, this little secluded area by the lake. It was perfect, trees swaying, the sound of the water gently hitting the shore. I remember looking at her, laughing at something stupid I said, and for a second, everything just felt right. Like the old days, you know. But then, there was this look in her eyes. Just for a split second. It's hard to explain, but it was almost like she was somewhere else. And just as quickly as I noticed it, she smiled, took a sip of her wine, and the moment passed. I brushed it off. But now, thinking back, I should have known. After that picnic, something started gnawing at me. I couldn't put my finger on it, but Jessica was different. Not in an obvious way, not at first, but it was in the little things. The kinds of things you wouldn't notice unless you were paying attention. She'd always been the type to vent about work, her coworkers, her boss, the clients who couldn't make up their minds. She had a sharp tongue, and no one was safe from it. But now, she was quieter. Reserved, even. When I'd ask about her day, she'd brush it off with, "Oh, the usual," and then steer the conversation back to me. It was subtle. Maybe too subtle. But when you've been married as long as we have, you notice these things. I shrugged it off for weeks, convincing myself it was just a rough patch. She had been promoted recently, and with that came longer hours and more responsibility. I told myself it was stress, that she was just dealing with the pressures of a demanding job. But then came the phone. Jessica was always attached to her phone, but this was different. She'd started keeping it face down on the table during meals, something she'd never done before. And she'd take it with her everywhere, like to the bathroom, when she went to get something from the kitchen, even when she stepped out for just a minute. She wasn't one to be secretive before, but now, well, I wasn't stupid. I noticed. I asked her about it once, casually. "Why the sudden attachment to your phone? Something I should know about?" I tried to keep it light, playful even, but the look on her face said it all. She froze. Just for a split second. Then she laughed. "What, are you keeping tabs on me now?" She waved it off like it was nothing, but there was a sharpness to her tone that caught me off guard. Like I'd hit a nerve. And that's when it started, those tiny cracks that weren't there before. I started paying closer attention, whether I wanted to or not. One Friday night, Jessica mentioned she was going out with her coworkers. It wasn't unusual, she'd done this before, a few drinks after work, nothing major. But this time, it felt off. She'd been going out a bit more frequently lately, and always with the same excuse, just some drinks with the girls. I remember sitting in the living room, watching her get ready. She was wearing that dress, the black one she usually saved for special occasions. It clung to her in all the right ways, and for a second, I found myself admiring her, the way I used to when we were first dating. She had this effortless beauty about her, like she didn't even have to try. But it wasn't just the dress, it was the whole thing. The extra time on her makeup, the way she straightened her hair just right. I made a joke, something about her being too dressed up for a night out with the girls. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's nothing," she said, brushing me off. We might hit a nicer place this time. Besides, I just felt like looking good. I wanted to believe her. Hell, I did believe her. Why wouldn't I? This was Jessica, my wife. But as she left that night, something in my gut twisted. You know that feeling? When everything on the surface seems normal, but deep down, you can tell something's wrong. I stayed up late that night. Not intentionally, at least, that's what I told myself. I was flipping through channels, trying to distract myself from the nagging feeling in the back of my head. Midnight came and went, and still no word from her. By 1 a.m., she still wasn't home. I texted her, casually, "Hey, everything okay?" It was almost another hour before she responded, "Yeah, just lost track of time. Be home soon." But when she did get home, something was different. She smelled like perfume, but not the kind she usually wore. And there was a faint scent of cologne, something that lingered as she slipped past me with a quick kiss on the cheek. "Long night?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. She yawned, avoiding my eyes. "You could say that." She went straight to bed, leaving me standing there in the dark, a cold feeling creeping up my spine. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going on. It wasn't just about the late nights or the extra time she spent getting ready, it was everything. Like there were pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit anymore. I started noticing more changes. Jessica was texting a lot more, but the moment I walked into the room, her phone would disappear into her pocket or purse. She'd say she was exhausted after work but then have a sudden burst of energy when it was time to head out for drinks again. Even on weekends, when we used to spend lazy mornings together, she'd be up early, saying she had errands to run. She was slipping away, and I could feel it. One Saturday, I decided to ask her about it. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the morning sunlight pouring in through the windows, everything looking deceptively normal. She was scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging my presence. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, "you've been really busy lately. Is everything okay?" She looked up at me, surprised, as if she hadn't expected me to ask. For a moment, there was a flicker of something, guilt, maybe. But she quickly masked it with a smile. "Everything's fine, just a lot going on at work." "Yeah, I get that," I said, leaning back in my chair. "It just seems like we haven't really had much time together." Her smile faltered for a second, but she recovered quickly. "It's just been a crazy few weeks, that's all. Things will calm down soon." But they didn't. In fact, they only got worse. A week later, she mentioned another work event, some networking thing on a Tuesday night. She didn't ask if I wanted to come, which was strange. Normally, I'd go with her to these things, but this time, she seemed almost relieved that I wasn't invited. That night, I decided to check her location on our shared app, not because I didn't trust her, but because something wasn't adding up. When I pulled it up, her location was turned off. That had never happened before. I tried to convince myself it was just a glitch, but my gut told me otherwise. I stayed up late again, waiting for her to come home. When she finally did, she seemed distant. There were no hugs, no small talk. She just mumbled something about being tired and went straight to bed. That's when I realized something had shifted between us, and no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, the signs were all there. I just didn't know what to do with them yet. I thought maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was reading too much into things. But then something happened that made me second-guess everything. It was a random Thursday afternoon when I got a text from Mike, one of my closest friends. We'd been friends since college, and although we didn't hang out as much anymore, we'd always stayed in touch. He was the kind of guy who didn't mince words, always straight to the point. His text was simple: "Can we talk? It's about Jess." My stomach dropped. I didn't know what to expect, but the wording was off, like there was something serious behind it. I called him right away. "Hey, what's up? I tried to keep my tone light, but I couldn't shake the tension creeping up my spine. Mike paused for a second, as if choosing his words carefully. Listen, man. I wasn't sure if I should say anything, but I've been hearing some things. People talk, you know. And I don't want to get in the middle of anything, but I figured you should know. I could hear my pulse in my ears. What kind of things? There was another pause, longer this time. Jess has been, well, people have seen her out, a lot. With some guy. Everything went quiet. My heart sank into my stomach. What do you mean? Who? Mike sighed. I don't know the guy, man. But it's been a couple of times now. Someone mentioned they saw them at a bar last week, and it didn't look like a business thing. More like, personal. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to ask him more, but I couldn't even form the words. My mind was racing, trying to process what he was telling me. Look, I don't know what's going on, Mike continued, but I thought you should hear it from me before it gets around. You know I've got your back, man. I thanked him, though I don't even remember what I said after that. I hung up, staring at the wall, my head spinning. Could it really be happening? Was I just being paranoid, or was there something more? The pieces started clicking into place, the late nights, the sudden mood shifts, the phone always out of reach. And now this. But still, I couldn't bring myself to believe it fully. I didn't want to. This was Jessica, my wife. Could she really be hiding something from me? As the day went on, I found myself checking the clock, waiting for her to come home. I needed to see her, talk to her, figure out what the hell was going on. But when she walked in the door that evening, everything felt normal. Too normal. She kissed me on the cheek, smiled, and asked how my day was, like nothing had changed. And maybe that's what scared me the most. After that call with Mike, I couldn't sit still. My mind kept replaying his words, people have seen her, with some guy. That sentence echoed in my head, eating away at me. I wanted to believe it was just a misunderstanding, but every part of me knew there was something I wasn't seeing. That weekend, I decided to do something I'd never thought I'd do. I started paying closer attention to everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. It wasn't just the late nights anymore or her disappearing acts. It was the way she'd glance at her phone and her fingers would move a little faster than usual, or the way she'd smile at texts but never mention who she was talking to. When I asked, she'd casually say, just work stuff, but I noticed she never actually opened up about it. I'm not proud of it, but I started snooping. One night, while she was in the shower, I grabbed her phone. My heart was pounding in my chest as I scrolled through her recent messages, but there wasn't much to see. The texts with her coworkers seemed normal. A few work-related things, a bit of harmless chit-chat, nothing that screamed affair. But that wasn't the only place to look. Her social media, which she used to be active on, had gone oddly quiet. It was unlike her to go days without posting a photo or updating a status, and it felt deliberate, like she was avoiding something. That only fueled my suspicions. I started checking everything, her emails, her Instagram, even her Pinterest, for crying out loud. But I came up with nothing. Still, I couldn't shake that feeling. It wasn't until I noticed one little detail that things really started to fall apart. She'd mentioned she was meeting a client the next day, a client she'd apparently been working with for weeks now. It seemed like a normal day, but then I remembered something. She'd said the same thing about this client last Thursday, and the Thursday before that. I decided to test it. The next morning, I casually asked, so, meeting up with that same client again today? She paused for a moment, just long enough to catch my attention. Yeah, why? Oh, no reason, I said, trying to sound indifferent, but inside, I was buzzing. That pause had given me all the confirmation I needed. There was something off about this client. When she left for work that morning, I waited an hour and then got in my car. I'm not proud of it, but I followed her. I kept my distance, keeping a few cars between us, and watched as she pulled up to a cafe on the other side of town. She parked and went inside, glancing around like she was waiting for someone. My heart was pounding. Was this it? Was I about to catch her in the act? I watched from across the street, trying to stay out of sight. It felt wrong, but I had to know. I couldn't keep living in this state of constant suspicion. About 10 minutes later, a man walked in, tall, dressed sharply in a suit. He sat down across from her, and she smiled. But it wasn't a polite, professional smile. It was the kind of smile I hadn't seen her give me in a long time. I stayed in the car, watching from a distance. They were talking, but I couldn't hear a word of it. All I had were the images, her leaning in, laughing at something he said, him touching her hand across the table. I felt like I was going to be sick. This was it. I had my answer. But I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed to know more. After that day at the cafe, my world shifted. It wasn't like I'd caught them doing anything explicit, but the way they interacted, it was all there, plain as day. I could feel it in my gut. That man wasn't just a client. He was something more, and Jessica had been hiding it. But I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed more than just a gut feeling and a few suspicious glances across a cafe table. If this was happening, if she was really betraying me, I needed the truth to hit hard. So I waited. That night, she came home like nothing was wrong. She smiled, kissed me on the cheek, and asked how my day was. I played along, pretended like everything was fine, but inside, I was bracing for what was to come. A few days later, Jessica said she had another late meeting. Same story, same excuses. This time, though, I was ready. I wasn't going to follow her again. I needed something concrete, something I could confront her with. So, I did the one thing I swore I'd never do, I checked her laptop. She always kept it with her, but that night, she'd left it out on the kitchen counter. It was risky, I knew that. If she caught me snooping, I wouldn't have any excuse. But I had to take that chance. I opened it up, fingers trembling as I typed in her password. It was the same one she'd always used, easy. And there it was, her email, her messages, all laid out in front of me. I clicked through her recent emails, expecting to find work correspondence, maybe something innocent. But then I found his name. The man from the cafe. His name was Derek. The emails between them weren't long, just a few back and forths. But the tone, it was clear this wasn't business. They weren't talking about marketing strategies or client deadlines. It was personal. There were inside jokes, subtle flirtations, things only two people who were close, too close, would say to each other. My heart raced as I scrolled further, reading the exchanges I hadn't been meant to see. It wasn't just the emails, it was everything. The way they spoke to each other was familiar, intimate. Like they'd been carrying this on for a while, right under my nose. Then, I found it. A single email that made everything fall into place. Can't wait for this weekend. I'll book the hotel. Same place as last time. The pit in my stomach dropped. Hotel. Last time. This wasn't just a few flirty emails. This wasn't just a cafe meeting. This was an affair. And it had been going on for God knows how long. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands went numb as I stared at the screen, the weight of what I just uncovered pressing down on me like a crushing force. All the late nights, the meetings, the unexplained absences, it all made sense now. She'd been lying to me, deceiving me, all while I'd been sitting at home, trusting her. I closed the laptop and stepped back, my mind reeling. The woman I thought I knew, the life we'd built together, it all felt like a lie. And now, I was left standing in the wreckage of it. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was just numb. But I knew what I had to do next. This wasn't something I could ignore anymore. The secret was out, and there was no going back. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The weight of what I'd found out crushed me, playing over and over in my mind. Jessica and Derek. The emails. The hotel. By morning, the numbness had given way to something else, anger, cold and sharp. I needed to see it for myself. I needed to catch her, face to face, so she couldn't wriggle her way out of this. No more lies, no more excuses. That Saturday, she told me she was heading out again. Work event, she said, like it was just another ordinary day. But I knew where she was really going. And this time, I wasn't sitting at home, waiting. As soon as she left, I grabbed my keys and followed her. I kept my distance, making sure she wouldn't notice me trailing behind. My heart pounded in my chest the entire drive, my hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I wasn't even sure what I was going to do when I got there. I just knew I had to see it with my own eyes. After about 20 minutes of driving, she pulled into the parking lot of a hotel on the edge of town. Not some fancy, upscale place, a business-class hotel, the kind you'd stay at for a night if you were just passing through. I parked a few spaces back, watching as she got out of her car and walked inside. Alone. I waited for a few minutes, long enough for her to get settled. Then I stepped out of the car, my heart hammering in my chest. Every step toward that hotel felt heavier than the last. The air felt thick, like I was wading through water. I walked into the lobby, pretending like I belonged there, trying to stay calm. The receptionist barely glanced at me as I made my way toward the elevators. My hands were shaking as I pressed the button for the second floor. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped out into a long, quiet hallway. The air was stale, the carpet worn. I had no idea which room they were in, but my gut told me I wouldn't have to wait long. I walked slowly down the hallway, my ears straining to hear something, anything, that would confirm what I already knew. And then, I heard it. Laughter. Muffled, but unmistakable, coming from behind one of the doors. I stopped dead in my tracks. My heart was racing, my stomach churning with a mix of rage and devastation. I walked toward the door, every step feeling like it was pulling me deeper into a nightmare. I stood there, just outside, listening. There were voices. Hers, and his. It was light, casual, like they didn't have a care in the world. And then, something else, the unmistakable sound of a bed creaking. That was it. I couldn't wait anymore. I pounded on the door, my fist slamming against the wood so hard I felt it reverberate up my arm. Everything went silent inside. For a moment, no one moved. Then, I heard hurried footsteps, and the door creaked open just a crack. Jessica's face appeared, eyes wide with shock. She was still in her dress, her hair disheveled, her lips slightly parted like she was about to say something, but no words came out. I pushed the door open, my eyes scanning the room. And there he was. Derek, sitting on the edge of the bed, shirt unbuttoned, his face pale as he realized who was standing in front of him. The room felt like it was spinning. My whole world came crashing down in that 1 second, the reality of it hitting me like a freight train. I didn't even recognize my own voice. This is what you've been doing. Lying to me. Sneaking around. Jessica's mouth opened, but nothing came out. She just stood there, frozen, like a deer caught in headlights. Derek scrambled to his feet, his hands up in some pathetic attempt to de-escalate the situation. "Look, man," he started, but I cut him off. "Don't." My voice was low, shaking with barely controlled rage. "Don't you dare." I turned back to Jessica, the woman I had loved for over a decade, the woman I had trusted with everything. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting between me and Derek, as if she was still trying to figure out how to get out of this. I didn't mean for it to happen, she stammered, her voice trembling. It just happened. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Just bitterness. You didn't mean for it to happen. So this is just, what? A mistake. She stepped forward, reaching out like she was going to touch me, but I pulled back. Please, just let me explain. No, I snapped, my voice cutting through the air like a knife. There's nothing to explain. I've seen everything I need to. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. Not anymore. I turned on my heel, leaving them both standing there, silent and ashamed. As I walked out of that hotel, I felt the cold air hit my face, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something else too, clarity. This wasn't just about them. This was about me. About what I was going to do next. Because now, I knew. There was no going back. The drive home from that hotel was a blur. I couldn't even remember getting into my car or pulling out of the parking lot. All I knew was that I had to get out of there, away from the lies, away from the betrayal that was now staring me right in the face. Jessica had cheated. There was no more doubt, no more suspicion. I had seen it with my own eyes. And now I had to figure out what came next. The minute I walked into the house, I knew what I had to do. There was no salvaging this. No coming back from what she had done. The person I had trusted with my life had torn it apart, piece by piece, right under my nose. And then I remembered. The prenup. It was something we'd agreed on when we got married. At the time, it had felt like just another precaution, something her lawyer had insisted on, and I'd gone along with it. I hadn't thought much of it back then because, in my mind, we'd never need it. But now, it was the one thing standing between her and everything we'd built together. The agreement was simple: if one of us cheated, all the assets, everything, would go to the spouse who stayed faithful. It had been Jessica's idea, ironically enough. She had always been so sure of herself, always adamant that no one would ever hurt her or betray her. It's just a safeguard, she'd said back then. It's not like we'll ever need it. But now, we did. I sat down at the kitchen table, my hands still shaking as I pulled out my laptop and searched through my files. There it was, the prenup, right where I'd saved it all those years ago. I opened the document, scrolling through the terms, my heart pounding as I read through the clause about infidelity. It was crystal clear: the cheater forfeited everything. Jessica was going to be left with nothing. Part of me felt a cold satisfaction reading those words. She had broken our trust, shattered our marriage, and now she was about to lose everything because of it. But there was another part of me, a part that still remembered who we used to be, that felt something close to pity. But I couldn't afford to dwell on that. Not anymore. I called my lawyer the next morning. I'd worked with him for years, but this wasn't the kind of call I ever expected to make. Ben, I said, my voice steady but firm, it's time. I need to start divorce proceedings. He didn't ask any questions. He'd handled enough of these cases to know what was going on. All right, he said calmly. We'll need to gather everything, make sure all the paperwork is in order. Do you have the prenup handy? I've got it, I replied, my eyes fixed on the document in front of me. And she violated it. She cheated. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, then a low whistle. Well, that changes things. You know what this means, right? She's entitled to nothing. I know. The words felt heavy in my mouth, but they were true. She'd brought this on herself. We spent the next hour going over the details, reviewing our assets, dividing up what was legally mine. The house, the savings, the investments, everything. Jessica had no idea what was coming, and that part hurt the most. How could she not see what she was about to lose? That evening, she came home, acting like nothing had happened. I hadn't confronted her since the hotel, hadn't given her any indication of what I knew. I wanted to handle everything the right way, through the legal channels. I wanted to make sure there was no room for manipulation, no way for her to twist this back on me. "Hey," she said softly, as if trying to test the waters. "Can we talk?" I didn't look at her. "We will. Soon." She seemed taken aback by my coldness, but didn't push it. Maybe she thought she could still explain it away, somehow convince me that what I saw wasn't real. But it was too late for that. A few days later, the papers were ready. My lawyer had drawn everything up, and it was time to serve her. That evening, I sat her down at the kitchen table, the same place we'd shared countless meals, conversations, and dreams. Now, it felt like a battleground. "I know about you and Derek," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. Her face went pale. She didn't try to deny it this time. She didn't say anything. "I've already spoken to my lawyer. The divorce papers are ready." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't waver. "You knew what you were doing, Jessica. You knew what this would cost you." She stared at me, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Please, let's talk about this. We can fix it." "No," I cut her off, pushing the papers across the table. "We're done. And because of what you did, you're walking away with nothing." Her eyes widened in shock as she glanced down at the papers, realizing what they were. "What do you mean, nothing?" "The prenup." I pointed to the section. "You remember, right? You cheat, you lose everything. It was your idea." Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages, her face crumpling as the reality sank in. "You can't. I didn't think you'd throw our life away for him, but here we are." My voice was calm, but inside, my heart was breaking. "You did this. You chose this. And now, you're facing the consequences." She started to sob, but I didn't move to comfort her. I just stood up and walked out of the room, leaving her to sit with the reality of what she'd lost. After I handed her the divorce papers, Jessica shut down. For a few days, she barely spoke. She moved around the house like a ghost, quiet and distant. It was as if the weight of everything had finally crashed down on her, and for a moment, I thought that was it, that she would accept what she had done and move on. But that moment didn't last. About a week later, she came home with a fire in her eyes that I hadn't seen in years. It was like she had flipped a switch, no more tears, no more quiet guilt. This was the side of Jessica I knew too well, the side that didn't take from anyone, who refused to let anyone or anything push her around. The one who always had to have the last word. "We need to talk," she said, her voice sharp as she stood in the doorway. I didn't look up from my laptop. "There's nothing left to talk about, Jess. It's over." She stepped into the room, her posture rigid, and threw a folder down on the table in front of me. "It's not over. Not until I say it is." I glanced at the folder, raising an eyebrow. "What's this?" "My lawyer's response," she said coolly, crossing her arms over her chest. "You really thought you could just take everything from me? That I'd let you walk away with it all because of one mistake?" "One mistake?" I repeated, my anger flaring up. "You've been cheating on me for God knows how long, Jessica. This isn't some one-time thing you can sweep under the rug." She glared at me, her jaw tight. "You're not leaving me with nothing. I built this life too. We both did. You can't just take it all away." I opened the folder, flipping through the papers inside. Her lawyer was trying to contest the prenup, claiming it was unfair, that she had a right to half of everything we owned. I couldn't believe what I was reading. "You're really going to fight this?" I asked, my voice low. "You cheated, Jess. You broke the agreement. You knew the consequences." Her face hardened. That prenup was written years ago, under different circumstances. I didn't know then what I know now. You can't hold me to it. I stood up, meeting her eyes, the anger rising in my chest. You can't be serious. You think you can just erase it all? Walk away after betraying me, and still get half of everything? I made a mistake, she shot back, her voice rising. But I'm not going to let you destroy my life because of it. I deserve more than this. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wasn't remorseful anymore, she was fighting to save herself, to claw back what she thought she was entitled to, despite everything she'd done. It was like she'd completely detached from the reality of her actions. What about the life we had? I asked, my voice breaking with frustration. The one you threw away for some fling with Derek? You think you can just fight your way out of this and pretend none of it happened? I don't owe you an explanation, she snapped. What I did, what happened between us, that's between us. But I'm not walking away with nothing. I'll fight this in court if I have to. I couldn't help but laugh, though it was bitter. Court? Really? You think a judge is going to look at this prenup and give you half after everything you've done? Her eyes flashed with defiance. It's not that simple, and you know it. I have rights. Just because you want to punish me for what happened doesn't mean I'm going to let you ruin my life. I stared at her, stunned by her audacity. This wasn't the woman I'd married. This wasn't the person I'd built a life with. She had changed, or maybe she had always been this way, and I was just too blind to see it. You ruined your own life, Jess, I said, my voice cold. You made the choice to betray me. And now you're going to pay for it. I'm not backing down. She clenched her fists at her sides, her eyes narrowing. We'll see about that. And just like that, she stormed out of the room, leaving me with the papers spread across the table. I sat down, staring at them, my heart pounding with anger and disbelief. She wasn't going to go down quietly. She was going to fight me every step of the way, even though she knew she was in the wrong. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal battles. Jessica's lawyer fought tooth and nail, trying to poke holes in the prenup, trying to claim that it was unfair, outdated, that she was entitled to more. They threw everything they could at me, hoping something would stick. But what they hadn't counted on was the ironclad nature of the agreement. My lawyer had written it meticulously, and I had stayed true to my end of the deal. Jessica, on the other hand, had violated the very terms she was now trying to escape. The evidence was damning. I had everything, the emails, the hotel records, even photos of her and Derek together. It didn't matter how many arguments her lawyer made, the facts were undeniable. When we finally made it to court, Jessica sat there, her eyes cold and hard, as my lawyer laid out the case. Every detail, every piece of evidence, was put on display for the judge. And when it was all said and done, there was nothing left for her to hide behind. The ruling came swift and clear, she had violated the prenup. She was walking away with nothing. I watched as her face crumpled, the realization sinking in. The fight was over, and she had lost. Everything she thought she could save had slipped through her fingers. After the ruling, she barely looked at me as we walked out of the courtroom. She didn't say a word. I could see the devastation in her eyes, but there was no sympathy left in me. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. That night, sitting alone in the house that was now mine, I didn't feel the triumph I thought I would. There was no satisfaction in winning this battle. I had lost something far greater, trust, love, the life we had built together. But at least now, I could move on. And that was something. The day after the court ruling, there was a strange silence in the house. The kind that feels both heavy and liberating. Jessica had packed her things and left without a word, leaving behind the echoes of the life we once shared. The emptiness of the house felt different now, less like a reminder of what I'd lost and more like a clean slate, a fresh start. The news of our divorce spread quickly, as things like this always do. It didn't take long before people started talking, speculating about what had happened between us. And in a small town like ours, everyone knew the truth sooner or later. Jessica's name was no longer spoken with admiration. People didn't look at her the same way. Her polished reputation, her success at work, all of it took a hit. The whispers followed her wherever she went. I heard from a mutual friend that she tried to keep things together, but the cracks in her armor were starting to show. The affair had tarnished her image, and she couldn't escape it. She'd lost more than just our marriage, she'd lost the respect of the people around her. Even her work suffered. Word got around that she wasn't as sharp, wasn't the same confident, controlled person she used to be. She'd alienated herself from the very world she tried to protect. But as for me, life, it started to feel lighter. I sold the house a few months after the divorce was finalized. I didn't need all that space anymore, and it felt good to let it go, like I was shedding the weight of the past. I moved into a smaller place, closer to the gym, where I could focus on myself, my work, and my future. The routines that once felt so empty after I'd caught her in the lie now felt like building blocks for something new. And I wasn't bitter. Surprisingly, after everything that happened, I didn't carry the anger with me. Maybe it was because I'd seen her try to claw her way back, watched her fail miserably, and realized that holding on to resentment wouldn't get me anywhere. In the end, I had what I needed, freedom. The chance to rebuild. People often ask if I'm okay, like they expect me to be some broken man after all of this. And I tell them the truth, I'm better. I didn't just survive, I came out stronger. The house, the money, the life we built, I got to keep it all. But more importantly, I got to keep myself. The weight of the betrayal no longer pulled me down. It had shaped me, sure, but it didn't define me. Jessica, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. The last I heard, she was struggling to get back on her feet. She'd moved to a smaller apartment in the city, far from the comfort of the home we once shared. Her career had stalled, and with the whispers of her affair still hanging over her, it became harder and harder for her to regain her footing. Her new life wasn't the fresh start she had imagined. Instead, it was a harsh consequence of the choices she'd made, one that she had to live with every single day. Derek? He didn't stick around for long. After the fallout, he disappeared from her life just as quickly as he'd entered it. Maybe it wasn't so thrilling when there was no secret left to hide, no thrill of sneaking around. Once the reality of her situation set in, Jessica was left alone, with nothing but the wreckage of her decisions. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel some grim satisfaction in knowing that. Not because I wished her harm, but because I knew I'd been right. She had gambled everything, our life, our love, and lost. And now, she was paying the price. But as for me, I was happy. Truly, for the first time in a long time. I started traveling more, taking time to focus on things I had pushed aside for years. I picked up old hobbies, reconnected with friends, and even started dating again. Slowly but surely, I was rebuilding, piece by piece. My life felt like mine again. The pain of betrayal had faded, replaced with a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. I had faced the worst, and I had come out the other side, whole. And now, whenever I think back on it, on Jessica, on Derek, on the mess they made of our life, I don't feel anger. I feel relief. Because I got out. And she'll never outrun what she did.